Hi everybody, we're going to talk about wall finish today, and here is a nice picture of a house in the process of being mudded and taped, and it appears to be getting sanded right now. So we'll talk about all these steps as we go through this process. So one of our big milestones at CR when we're building the house is we need to get a bunch of inspections stacked up so that we can get the drywallers in over spring break. Ideally, they come in over spring break, do all the drywall, we come back, we can start hanging doors, nailing up casing, painting, stuff like that. Okay? So we need to get our framing inspection. Okay? The inspector's going to check all of the rough framing, make sure all of our hold downs are in place, make sure everything looks good there. The inspector is going to check our rough wiring. Okay, all of the wires need to be run in boxes, protected in the boxes so they don't get damaged by the drywaller. The inspector is going to come around and look at how many wires are in the boxes. Okay, there's a code that references how many conductors you can have in a certain size box. The inspector is going to check the rough plumbing, make sure nothing's leaking, and the inspector is going to check the insulation also, make sure we've done a good job of insulating the walls, filled all the cavities. We have to have insulation on all of the hot lines for the plumbing. There's a lot of things that have to fall into place before we can get this go-ahead to drywall. And the reason is because after the drywall goes up, everything is concealed and the inspector can't look at anything anymore. Okay, so we need to get a lot of stuff done before we get the okay to drywall. Okay, and now I'm talking a lot about drywall, also known as gypsum board, sheetrock. Sheetrock is a brand. Drywall is probably the best generic name. This is far and away the most common wall finish that we're going to see. Okay, 99% of interior homes are finished this way. I'm not entirely sure. Even if you are going to do something different, paneling, something like that, you still have to have drywall behind it for fire spread. Drywall, gypsum boards are a great way to prevent the spread of fire. Also, it's a great way to perform interior air sealing in your house. Okay? As long as everything's taped, sealed up at the plates, it's a great way to stop the transfer of air from the inside into the wall cavity. Okay? I don't see a whole lot of wood paneling now. In the 60s and 70s, it was a more common wall finish, and at the kind of like 60s end of things, it was actually real wood. You'd see some nice wood paneling in homes. As we moved into the 70s and into the 80s, it was really common to see this like 1/8 thick, they called it hardboard paneling. It's terrible stuff. I guess at the time people really enjoyed it, but even so, it was still nailed up over drywall. Okay, there was still gypsum board behind that wood paneling. And every time I talk about this, I think of some friends of ours who restored an old Victorian, and they found pictures of the previous owners like smiling as they were tearing down all of the molding in the house and putting up hardboard paneling. And it's just heartbreaking to think of it now, but at the time they thought they were doing something neat and contemporary in the house. But you know, some people just need to leave the poor house alone. Okay, but back to wall finish. Sometimes you'll have a combination of finishes. It's very common to have wainscoting, especially in older homes, and that's wood, usually wood, and they have some kind of MDF materials and stuff now also, but it's a paneling that goes about halfway up the wall, usually capped off with a chair rail. We'll talk more about that when we get into like interior finishes and stuff like that, okay? Interior moldings and stuff. really early homes, and then especially around here, like at the house I'm sitting in right now, was built in 1895. All of the walls were 1 by 12 redwood, okay, nailed to the studs. 2 layers of 1 by 12 on the floor, 1 by 12 redwood on the ceiling, and then sometimes they would lath and plaster over that. Sometimes they would put burlap or some kind of wallpaper over that, something very rough finishes, but they didn't have sheetrock back then. They didn't have gypsum board until, I think it was invented in the 20s, but it wasn't until like the 50s, 60s that it really became prominent. Okay, lath and plaster in older homes was far and away the most common finish. But, and I got to do a little more research, you usually would only see it in higher end homes around the turn of the century. Like in, for example, my house was just wood planks with some sort of wallpaper over it, okay? Nicer homes would be plastered. You get into the 20s, maybe there's more material availability, maybe there's more trained workers. You start seeing that everywhere in houses in this area, okay? A little bit about it, up until the 50s, this was what you saw in homes, okay? Even into the 60s, before sheetrock really kind of took over. It is a cementitious material, that's the plaster, and the lath are strips of wood. They're like little 1/4 inch thick by 1.5 inch wide strips that are nailed to the studs. And between each piece of lath, there's a little keyway here. Okay, there's a little 1/2 inch, 3/8 wide strip between those lath boards. What happens is you trowel that plaster on, and you trowel it up, and it pushes the plaster into these little keyways in between these little strips, and that allows the plaster to grip onto those lath boards, okay? This is a good finish, okay? Unfortunately, as we found out, not so good in our area, in seismically active areas. Okay? The reason is it's so hard, it's so brittle, it cracks anytime there's any amount of movement. And you've got these old houses that are built on post and pier foundations. Any amount of settling, any amount of wind blowing. Remember, there's no plywood, there's no braced shear walls or anything like that. These houses move around a lot, they settle a lot. That plaster just cracks and cracks and cracks. And my first house, I was very whimsical about it. I didn't have any money, okay? I was going to replace or repair all of the plaster. Okay? I was going to go in and trowel over the cracks, tape all the cracks, and redo all the finish. It was going to be great, and I put all this time and energy into it, and a week later, it had all just spiderweb cracked all over again because we had a 3.0 earthquake and the wind blew against the house. Okay, so it's unfortunately a losing battle, I think, trying to keep plaster going in old houses. Okay, it just gets more brittle the older it gets. They have some newer plasters that I think can last better. Also, I think if it's applied over gypsum board, just like a plaster veneer, I think it would hold up a lot better than going over wood. Okay, but the plaster finish is incredible. You can trowel it to a really high finish, a very smooth finish that you just simply can't achieve with the joint compound that we're going to talk about here soon enough.